So a lot of you guys keep asking about my dad's pickup truck project that he started 2 years ago. And this is it. This is 2 years later, and this is what he's accomplished on it. He started sanding the bed and doing some, he actually fixed the rear quarter panels, completely rebuilt them from the inside out with new metal. The engine's still sitting in the garage, and really it's kind of looking sad, but there's a reason for that, and a very good reason, and we're going to take a look at that. But this truck is solid, which is rare for New England, just as an aside. But anywho, let's take a look at the reason why this is still looking like a lawn ornament. Now this is what's kept him preoccupied for the past 2 years, more so in the past year. This is a mid-60s Triumph trophy that he picked up 5 years ago, 7 years ago. And it was a basket case. It was basically just a frame. It was missing most of its parts. It was in shambles. But he bought it because he saw potential in this bucket of bolts. I don't even think it had fenders, did it?
No.
No fenders?
Hardtail was welded.
And it had a hardtail already added to it. Anyway, pretty much the only thing I remember him having with this bike was the wheels, the engine, the frame, and the tank, which is apparently a British market tank and not normally sold in the US. But he just really in the past year or so is when he really put his nose to the grindstone to get this thing running again. He had the gentleman across the street owns a body shop, so he provided all the paint work, and this actually almost was painted flat black, but the neighbor convinced him that if you put a little color on it, it'll pop, and I believe that it really brings it out. And so a lot of customization here. We'll talk about this in a second, but the bobbed fenders, the bobbed rear fender, that's all, just none of these parts really belong on this exact bike. This bike is built from God only knows how many different bikes. And so let's take a look at this elephant in the room here. This is not only a suicide shifter, but it is a suicide clutch. He managed, now my father is one of those guys who can look at something and make it work. He dreams up all sorts of stuff all the time. He does not have a mechanical engineering degree, but I think he's quite qualified as one. Anyway, this device here, you swing it out this way and it releases the clutch, and then you pop it into gear by pushing it forwards or backwards. This is actually one of the first things he designed for this bike, and I think he designed the bike around it, really. And what makes this device so ingenious is the way and this is how he works, but he will take junk and make treasure out of it. This is actually an assistive lever for a vehicle modified for handicapped use. This is actually a brake lever, I believe, and it was he did some customization to it, but he managed to turn it into a shift lever. And you'll notice some of you who work in public buildings especially, or this might look familiar to you, this is actually a door closer arm, and that was just lying in the shelf in the garage from his work doing security door installations. But it's just basically take a pile of parts, draw it out in your head, and make it work. And that's what he does well. But anyway, it is a 500cc motor, parallel twin. Really no performance modifications, but that's really not the point. Alright. Yes, we're missing parts. There is no speedometer on here yet. And he still has to put in the fork lock cylinder. And You know, it does pay to be a machinist too, because again, a lot of custom machining here, and the shop that he works for, this is a product that they produce. This is a custom product for a particular customer, and this is one of the rejects. And again, always thinking about what can I use that for. There you go. If you're one of those guys who has a nasty habit of, I can't throw that away because I might use it for something, that's pretty much what we got going on here. The whole bike is a testament to that theory. So why don't I start it up? I'm not going to demonstrate the shifter because I don't want to die today. So I'm going to have my father hold the camera while we do that. All right. But anyway, this is what happens when you you know, when you've had many professions under your belt, from auto mechanic to locksmithing to fabrication, welding, precision machining, which is what he does today. And as you see with the repurposed door closer arm, he's also done a little bit of security system installation as well. So having all of those skills rolled into one, I mean, that gives you the drive and the ability to produce something like this with parts left over. One more thing he wanted me to mention is that yes, this is a bolt-on hardtail. I believe it was a kit originally. It is now permanently welded to the frame, so that there is no movement or possibility of loosening of bolts. But it's a solid machine and rides really well. So real quick, when he bought this bike, I was actually with him when he bought it, and he really wanted this thing because he really saw potential, and unfortunately it was not in running condition, and we didn't have the tools to check the fluids and stuff, so he kind of bought it on the seller's word, which is something that he knows better, and he took that risk. He owned that risk when he bought it. But here's the thing, we got it to the house and we hooked it up to some fuel, and I believe we checked the oil level and it was fine, and it actually started. It started right up. But what was happening was we quickly realized that there was something very wrong, and there was black goo just going. It looked like peanut butter, and it was like, actually it wasn't black, it was like a orangey, nasty looking stuff kind of pouring out of the primary case, and we're like, that's not good. So we shut it down, and then he took the motor off the frame and started tearing into it, and what he found was that somehow the transmission was filled with water and oil, and the crankcase was fine, but the transmission itself was loaded with crap, and it was worse than we thought. We found that most of the bearings were completely rusted away. It was in really bad shape. The seller did a number in making this thing look presentable when he bought it. I mean, it wasn't a complete bike. It was really a box of parts, a frame, and an engine. I mean, it was as basket case as it gets. But he totally misrepresented the bike. But again, my father took that risk and rolled with it. So he ended up having to tear the transmission completely down and rebuilt it from the ground up. He then found that there was a bolt. It's a very common problem in this engine where one of the head studs will pull out, and he had to use some of his machining skills to fix that. I believe he put a hardened steel dowel into the block and pinned it into position, and he was able to get the right torque on it that way. Another thing that he learned working on this bike, it's a British bike, and it required completely rethinking everything you know about wrench and socket sizes, and he had to buy a whole new set of wrenches. The British use their wrench heads or bolt heads are sized not by the distance or the span of the actual hex nut, but by the diameter, I believe, the diameter of the bolt itself. So it's a little different. So a 15 millimeter British isn't the same as a 15 millimeter standard. But that's learning experience. He had never owned a British bike before. But here it is. It's running. It's drivable, and he put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this. And so let's hear it run, shall we?